So, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the FinTech summer sessions. Super happy to have you all here with us. We still have people that are joining, but we're going to get started. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome to the FinTech summer sessions. Quick reminder, this is the third edition of the FinTech summer sessions. So make sure that you also go back and look at the first two editions, which are available on our YouTube page. So please do that. If you are returning, welcome back and thank you for returning. You were for sure present for last session, which was a super exciting session as well, where we were talking about I'm blanking out right now, Bess. I'll get back to you on that. But we do have a super exciting session today for you, an amazing session. And we have a special speaker today with us as well. So CBDCs have been coming up in all the previous sessions that we were talking about. And all of you had many questions on CBDCs and the uses of CBDCs and why we need them and why not. So we are very glad to present to you today Mr. Hugh, who's here with us to talk specifically about this topic. So Hugh comes in obviously with vast experience in the fintech space. He is the co-founder of CFTE, which is the Center for Finance, Technology and Entrepreneurship, one of the leading platforms for fintech education. So that's another one for you guys. You've been asking on resources on where I can learn about fintech and how I can learn more about fintech. So you've got CFTE and you've got the co-founder himself today with us as well. So welcome, Hugh. Thank you for being with us. Just as going back to last week's session was about wealth management, and really it was exciting, and we learned about the different ways where we can, what tools are available for people to utilize and what sort of solutions are needed for wealth management. But today the focus is definitely on CBDCs. So back to Hugh. Hugh comes not only with his experience as co-founder at CFT, but he's also worked in the banking sector, including Citibank, and has collaborated and worked with several renowned universities, including Hong Kong University and Singapore University. So I'm going to pass it on to Hugh to take us through this exciting session on CBDC, but do make sure to stay with us till the end, because we do have our Q&A sessions that will be happening, as well as discussions and announcements related to our upcoming event, 24 FinTech. So do please stay with us. Hugh, welcome to the FinTech Summer Sessions, and looking forward to learning more about CBDCs today.
Thank you very much, Karim, and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you. A very, very big thank you also to FinTech Saudi for this very, very kind invitation. And today we'll talk about one of the most fascinating, perhaps, topic in financial services, which is CBDCs. And here we will talk about the future of money and what is money in a digital world. You will see that it is a very impactful topic because we all use money, you, me, everybody, large organizations, small organizations, everybody uses money. Because of that, it is also quite a complex topic. And so my objective through this hour is to make sure that by the end of this session, you have a very good understanding of why are we talking about CBDCs and what are CBDCs. If you have a good foundation of it, then I will share with you some resources that will help you to go much deeper into the topic. So first, let me introduce myself very quickly. As Karim mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of CFT. Previously, I used to be in banking, so I used to run a group at Citi in London. I was also affiliated with Oxford, where I co-created the Oxford FinTech course, and Hong Kong University, where I co-created the Hong Kong University FinTech MOOC that was translated in Arabic through FinTech Saudi. For this topic, which is CBDCs, I was program director of blockchain and digital assets in financial services, which was co-created by CFT and Singapore Management University, and also a senior lecturer on a course called Re-Architecting the Financial System, co-created between CFTE and 11D. So let's jump directly into this topic of CBDCs. And for that, we will go through 5 main topics. First, what are currencies and how are they being issued by central banks? What are CBDCs, central bank digital currencies? What is the impact that they have on financial services? We will then look at a few case studies, including case studies from Saudi. And then finally, we will explore some of the future trends of CBDCs. Overall, it will take around 1 hour for us to go through all those 5 different topics. You will see that in terms of the outline, there's quite a lot of content that I will cover. You will get all the slides after the session, so you will be able to follow it. But before that, I'd love to know what you would like to know about CBDCs. So if you could just take, for example, your phone and scan this QR code, or go to the website menti.com and use the code 44516268, which you can see at the top. Could you type in the small box that you have on your phone what you would like to know about CBDCs? Okay, I have no idea. Very good. So I guess now having a good foundation of CBDCs would be great. Everything. We'll try to get as much as possible. Not sure we'll get through everything, but as much as possible. Changes in the world. That's really good. How they can be used, definitely. Some knowledge, we'll get through that. I see that regulations is here, so that's really good. Let me just wait a bit more and let's see if there's some big trends that we can get from those slides. I see at the moment 120 responses. I know that we have a lot of people on the call. We have a few thousand people on the call. So we'll see if there's some trends getting out of your answers. I see a few people putting everything. So we won't cover everything, but in this session, we will definitely cover the foundations. And from the foundations, you will get a good idea of why are we talking about CBDCs and what are CBDCs. From there, you should have a good idea, and that will allow you to get much deeper into the topics of CBDCs. I see some replies which are linked to use cases. That's a really good point. So we will look at some use cases and case studies of CBDCs, more specifically 4 of them. Very good. So what I would suggest, continue to put your answers, and then I will start the presentation right away. So first, CBDCs, what does it mean? What are we talking about? So a CBDC is a central bank digital currency. There are 3 terms which are important in this. The first one, which is central bank. The second one, digital. And the third one, which is currency. So digital, I think you're all very familiar with what that means. We'll dive a bit deeper into the currency and central bank side because they are really fundamental, actually. So a currency is money which is issued by a government or by a central bank for a specific country. What is money, actually? Money, we're all very familiar with money, but what is it? Money is usually defined through 3 main features. The first one is that money is a store of value. So if I have money today, I can be quite confident it will keep its value for tomorrow. It is also defined as a unit of account so that it can serve as a reference for different types of goods or services and as a medium of exchange in order to buy or sell. What is money? If we think of that, money has been around for a long, long time, and money started really as commodities. For example, gold, silver were seen as money. And for example, the first gold coins were more than 2,500 years ago. Other commodities like salt, for example, was seen as money. That's why we have the name or the word salary. The salary is come from the fact that people received money to acquire salt. But the reality is that in the world of today, we do not use gold, we do not use salt or other commodities. We use what we call fiat currencies. So fiat currencies like the real, like the dollar, the pound, the euro, would be fiat currencies. This is what we consider as money today. And so we'll talk about money in a digital world. What is a central bank? So a central bank is an institution which is responsible for managing a country, currency, money supply, and interest rates. We hear about central bank very, very often. And let me ask you a question, for example, between those four different organizations, one which is the Federal Reserve, the other one which is the Financial Conduct Authority, the third one being SAMA, and the fourth one being the Bank of Japan, which one is not a central bank? So let me start this one. So which one is not a central bank? So I see some answers. So some of you are saying the Federal Reserve is not a central bank. The FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, is not. SAMA is not. So let's have a bit more answers. Okay, very good. So I think most of you got it right, because the organization which is not a central bank is the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority. So which are central banks? Some of them you actually know or hear in the news. So the Federal Reserve is a central bank in the US. In the UK, that would be the Bank of England, which is a central bank. In Europe, the European Central Bank. In Saudi, that would be SAMA, which is the central bank. In India, the RBI, Singapore, MAS, HKMA, in Hong Kong, the People's Bank of China, in China, for example, or the Bank of Japan. So those are examples of central banks. So central bank digital currencies, we see that we're getting a bit closer. We're talking about the future of money, and we're talking about central banks having a very important role to play. So what kind of role? In order to understand the role of the central bank in CBDCs, we need to understand how does banking work today. And when we think of banking, it seems quite obvious. A lot of people would have a bank account, but how does money move between all those different entities, which is a central bank, a bank, and you, for example? So today, in most economies, we have what we call a two-tiered monetary system. Two-tiered meaning that there are two types of institutions. One, a central bank, and secondly, a bank, or what we would call a commercial bank. What is your interaction as a person with those entities? For example, how do you interact with a central bank? So you can interact with the central bank through cash, actually. Central cash is issued directly by a central bank. And for you as a person, you can receive, spend, use that cash. So this is your direct interaction with the central bank. The reality is that you do not use cash all the time for all your activities. For example, you'd save money in a bank, or you'd need money to buy a car through a loan, for example, or a house with a mortgage. So your interactions would be through a bank. That's called commercial bank money, or bank money in general. And the link between a bank and a central bank are through reserves. So if you think about it, the interactions that you have with money are either with a central bank directly through cash, and in a lot of cases, directly with your bank through commercial bank money. And the link between the bank and the central bank are through reserves. This construct of the financial system is now being used in a lot of countries around the world. And this is one of the foundations which is really important to understand when we talk about CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Here I summarize those two different types of ways that central bank money, so the money that comes from the central bank, interacts with either us through banknotes or the banks themselves. That's what we would call the central bank reserves. And so when we think of money and money in the digital world, which is really the topic of CBDCs, how can we think about it? There are two ways to think about it. And this is what we call the process of digitization and digitalization. So if you know the yellow pages, I don't know if you know because yellow pages have now disappeared, but if you know the yellow pages, which were this very, very big book where you'd have a lot of, for example, addresses, names, phone numbers of different businesses, digitizing the yellow pages meant that someone put the yellow pages on the internet and you could find exactly the same information on the internet. But of course, nobody uses that today. Very, very few people would use this version of the yellow pages. What do they use? They use something which is totally different. They would use, for example, Google Maps. Google Maps can answer the same objective. I'm looking for the address of a restaurant, but it is totally different. It wasn't about taking the yellow pages and putting them on the internet. It was about rethinking the whole experience on the internet and meeting the same objective. For money in the digital world, this is the same process that we are seeing, which is that for the last 20 years, we have seen the digitization of money, which is basically what you have on your phone. That could be, for example, payment on your phone. That would be accessing your bank account on your phone. This is just taking money the way it was, and we have basically duplicated it for the internet. However, it's not really the future of money in the digital world. The future of money in the digital world can be quite different, actually. And this is what we're talking about today. We're talking about what is money in the digital world. And for a central bank, one of the main instruments is central bank digital currencies. So we have looked through this first part at the role of money, at the role of central bank, and we have seen that the future of money through a central bank is what we call CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. So now let's have a look at CBDCs and what they are actually. So in its simplest definition, we could say that CBDCs are a form of digital money. So here we're really talking about digital, and that would be issued by a central bank. So we have seen all those different definitions. But why are we talking about CBDCs today, and where did it start from? And so let me ask you a question. If you think about it, what was at the origin of CBDCs? We're 2024, 10 years ago, nobody was really talking about CBDCs or was even thinking of the concept of CBDCs. So in your opinion, what was at the origin of CBDCs? Okay, very good. Some of you are saying Bitcoin, crypto, technology, the blockchain, digital coin. It was cash, really interesting. Transaction cost, very good. Hash technology, credit cards. So we see a few different trends. Some of them are linked to Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. Some of them are linked more to the technology underlying Bitcoin, which is blockchain, for example. Some of them around fintech, digitalization, that's really good. I see some of the reasons, some people talked about, for example, faster payment. So that's really interesting. I leave 10 more seconds for people to put more information. There's one reason which is quite fundamental. I don't see it here. So I haven't seen, so I know there's a lot. It might be here, but there's one reason which hasn't been mentioned here. So we'll see if someone finds it. Yes, I still don't see it. So let me give you my two reasons which were at the origin of CBDCs. You can continue to put the information. We'll see if someone gets this second answer. So there were two very important events that led to CBDCs as we know them today. The first one, and some of you, a lot of you have mentioned it, that was 2008 and the white paper on Bitcoin. And that led, of course, to Bitcoin, but that led to something much, much more fundamental, which is the concept of digital money through distributed ledgers. The idea that we could have digital money in a different way. So that was the first important event in 2008, and that was really a different way of thinking. How can we have money on the internet? And that's the technology. So some of you mentioned the technology. That's definitely the technology of distributed ledgers. But what was the second reason? There was a second reason that was equally important, and that was in 2019, the launch of Libra, which you might remember. So the launch of Libra by Facebook, and really with the promise that they would help billions of users to send Libras around the world without the need of any fiat currencies. So those two events led to CBDCs. So first, 2008, why is this white paper important? It's important because at the core of money, we have seen that there's something which is fundamental, which is the concept of trust. So trust through a government or a central bank or through a commercial bank is really key. This is because of trust that you have money in the form of fiat currency. But there's more than that. There's more than that. For example, if I had those £5 or reals that I wanted to give to Karim, if I gave him the banknote, what has to happen is that as I gave him the note, it has to disappear from my hand and it has to go in his hands. I cannot keep the note while he has this version of the note. This is obvious in the case of cash. It is not obvious on the internet. Why? Because on the internet, you can replicate any kind of content for free and very easily. So if I create a new currency, which is called currency A, what can give me the guarantee that as I create currency A, when I give it to Karim, it has disappeared from my wallet and it went into Karim's wallet. And this is where there was quite an interesting answer from this white paper, which is this idea, which seems quite simple now, but which is saying, how do I know that this money disappeared from my wallet and went into Karim's wallet? Actually, we just need to have a ledger, which is a public ledger, which is the list of all the transactions, and all the transactions are public. And since all the transactions are public, in that case, we will know that it's not in my wallet anymore, and it is in Karim's wallet. That was the initial white paper in 2008. And from there, it really changed the way we thought of what can I do on the internet with something like money. So that's a technological solution that is quite important in our thinking on CBDCs. The second impact was Libra. So Libra was really a wake-up call for a lot of governments and central banks because Libra wanted to launch its own currency, which was pegged to which was linked to a basket of different currencies, with this objective that anybody on Facebook could just send money to anybody else around the world without having to use any of the main currencies, whether it was the euro or dollar or British pound or others. That led to a wake-up call for governments, central banks, and institutions, which suddenly realized that in the digital world, it was possible for a private institution like Facebook to create its own currency and get other people to use it without the need for a central bank. So it was really a wake-up call, and that's the reason why a lot of the projects that you see in CBDC starts in around 2019, which is all those central banks, governments now looking at what is the future of money in the digital world? Because if we do not drive this transformation, there will be some private actors that will drive this transformation. So those two very, very important milestones, 2008, 2019, led to this concept of central bank digital currencies. Great. I see that there's a lot of Q&A. Do not hesitate to ask a lot of questions. We will keep 10 minutes at the end to answer all those questions. So if we look at the history of CBDCs, today, in 2024, you have a few live CBDCs. So CBDCs that have been implemented in certain countries. For example, like in the Bahamas with the cent dollar, or Nigeria with Inera. So you see that all of that started after 2019. On the other hand, you also have a lot of experimentations of CBDCs. For example, China was one of the first countries to test CBDCs with the ECNY. The digital euro also is one of the experimentations which is taking place at the moment. The digital British pound is one of those experimentations. And in Brazil, for example, they're currently working to release potentially a CBDC, the DREX, by next year. So overall, what you have is that you'd have around, or actually more than 100 experimentation of CBDCs by central banks around the world, and a few of them that have been implemented. Perhaps let me take a step back here before I go further in the presentation. When we talk about CBDCs, we talk about money and we talk about central banks. Money and central banks are really at the core of everything we do, at the core of business, at the core of our professional lives, our personal lives, pretty much everything. So although we have seen some implementations, live implementations of CBDCs in some countries like Nigeria or Jamaica, for example, for a lot of other countries and bigger countries, it will take more time. It will take more time because it has so many ramifications and impacts when we think of introducing a digital currencies that it cannot be done overnight. So it's really, really fascinating. It's really interesting. But when you look at this, just keep that in mind, which is there will be a lot of experimentations, much, much more, hundreds and hundreds of them. In terms of real implementations, it is likely to take time just because we're really talking about money and the monetary system. So on this, let's continue. So CBDCs, what types of CBDCs? There are mainly two types of CBDCs you are likely to hear about. Retail CBDCs and wholesale CBDCs. Retail CBDCs are CBDCs that can be used by the retail consumers, people like you and me, which means that I could have a CBDC that I could use directly on my phone, for example. That would be for retail CBDCs. Some examples of the retail CBDCs are in China, the ECNY is a retail CBDC version where people have experimented directly on their phone and can go and buy with CBDCs. The other version of CBDC is what we call wholesale CBDCs. So wholesale CBDCs is not for end users, people like you and me, but it's for organizations. What kind of organizations? Most likely the banks first, so the commercial banks, You remember, the second tier in the two-tiered system, so the commercial banks and potentially some other organizations, perhaps large corporates, for example. At the moment, in terms of the experimentation, we see both types of experimentations. We see retail experimentations, we see wholesale experimentations. Some people have very different views in terms of what is the most interesting. Should it be retail or should it be wholesale? The reality is that I don't think we have a clear view or clear consensus everywhere saying that it should be retail or wholesale. There's still a lot of experimentation for CBDCs at the moment. Here, I'll show you one example of type of retail CBDCs. I won't take you through all the cash flows that you have here. What I wanted to show you is that CBDCs since 2019 have been subject to a lot of thinking, a lot of experimentation, a lot of cross-border collaborations. So pretty much every central bank has worked on CBDCs, both on their own and as part of larger collaboration, international collaboration projects. And because of that, we're seeing a lot of different models which are being tested, experimented, and thought of. And so that's one of the types of examples that we see. We are likely to see other examples as we get to know more about it. But one of the sources which is really interesting for anybody to use is the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, which is based in Basel, in Switzerland, is involved in a lot of experimentations with banks around the world, central banks around the world, and also a lot of, let's call that, thought leadership on the CBDCs. So if you're interested by this topic, you should definitely have a look at BIS and look at all the different projects that they work on. So if you look at the reports of BIS, this is typically the kind of information you're likely to find. So we have looked at what are CBDCs, but why are we using CBDCs, or why do we need to use CBDCs? So I told you we would talk about the what, but let's think about the why. So I don't know why someone is putting Vanessa, whom I know quite well, actually, who's in Singapore. She's been quite involved in the fintech space. But financial inclusion is definitely one of the reasons for CBDC. Cross-border, it's really good. Convenience, definitely. Faster, international, very good. That's really good. So I see financial inclusion, which is a really big one. I see cross-border international that comes back quite often also. Cashless, that's a really good point. Convenience, definitely. Regulation, security, that's really good. So I see a few trends here. So continue to put more answers because it's really good. That gives you an idea of what you think of CBDCs. Okay, very good. So if I had to summarize what you have here, financial inclusion seems to be a very big one. Control, and I guess when you talk about control, it could be about control of money by the central bank or control of you as a user. Trust, very good. Convenience, and international and cross-border. So they are all very, very valid reasons. So I will show you here some of the reasons which were mentioned by the Bank of England. And let me tell you what the Bank of England was thinking of when in 2020 they were saying, we will be looking at the different ways to think of CBDCs, including the digital pound. So the reasons that you mentioned, they are pretty much all here. For example, cashless economy, which is the meeting future payment needs in the digital economy, is definitely one. The fact that we have less cash in society in general. Addressing the consequences of a decline in cash is here. Some of you mentioned cross-border payments. You see it here also. There's some that you didn't mention, perhaps you have mentioned, but there were so many answers, which is, for example, competition and innovation. That was one of the objectives of the central bank, to say, we want to make sure that we can provide this infrastructure for much more innovation and competition in payments. Someone was mentioning control. That's definitely a very good one. Here, the Bank of England wanted to avoid the risk of new forms of private money creation. So definitely Libra, they didn't want to see organizations like Libra having the monopoly for money. And then finally, some other reasons like improving the availability and usability of central bank money. What you do not see here, and which was the main reason that a lot of you mentioned, is, for example, financial inclusion. And that's a really, really good point, which is that the reasons to launch CBDCs are likely to be very, very different depending on the countries, their financial system, and their objectives. In the case of the Bank of England, they didn't think that financial inclusion was an important one for CBDC in that case. But the reality is that there are a lot of countries that have financial inclusion as one of their top priorities for CBDCs. So if you think of the reasons to launch CBDCs, there are all those different reasons, but the first one usually is that there needs some kind of version of money in the digital world. So that's the reason why CBDC has to be there. And after that, you could have all those different reasons which you have mentioned and which we will see in the case studies. This is a very good framework which was released in the BIS paper, and that was originally from MNB, the Central Bank of Hungary. And there was some conceptualization about what do we need to think about if we want to launch a CBDC. And the reason why I like this is that when we think of CBDCs, very quickly we tend to think of technology, distributed ledgers. But actually, that's not the first reason or the first question that we should ask ourselves. And you see that the first questions are much more fundamental, which is really around what is it that we're really trying to do, for whom, what kind of audience? Are we talking about some retail consumers? Are we talking about different banks or organizations? How does it link to the monetary policy? So really the policy of the central bank. And after that, we go more into the details of, does it replace cash? So basically, if you remember, this link that you have between the central bank and the consumer, or does it replace bank money? So the link that you have between the consumer and the bank, who is involved in this whole value chain and ecosystem. Anonymity, which is usually one of the big questions that people have around CBDCs. And only last is around technology. So if you think of CBDCs, those 7 different layers are really important. And I think what I really liked about it is that the first layers are really around the why. Why are we trying to do this? Is it just because there's a technology and we should use it for money? Not really. Why is really around these fundamentals of money. So now let's have a look at what is the impact that CBDCs will have in financial services. Let's take a step back. When we talk about CBDCs, we're really talking about money, and money in a digital world. And because of that, it can have a lot of different impacts. It can have an impact, for example, for innovation across the whole economy. It's really a possible infrastructure of money on which the whole innovative economy can be built. It can help for facilitating cross-border, or it can also, let's call that, push the boundaries of money, do things that we have never thought of before. For example, programmable money. And we'll have a look at an example. But what is interesting in terms of CBDCs is that if we start thinking of CBDCs and we start highlighting or drawing, sketching the whole value chain of finance, then very quickly, it can be really, really broad, because CBDC is about money, which can be money in a domestic market. So it can link to pretty much everything and all types of activities, but it can be also money in an international context, which is money interacting with foreign jurisdictions. And so when we think about CBDCs, the impact is likely to be extremely broad, both domestically and internationally. That's the reason why I said that implementing CBDC is likely to take time, because it has so many impacts. What kind of impacts? It can have impacts on pretty much everything. So if you're a financial institution, if you work in financial services, it can have an impact on your business model, the way that you make money and have your activities. It is likely to have impacts, of course, on regulations, because CBDCs will have to be regulated. It is being led from the central bank. It is likely to have an impact on technology, because the way that you will interact with money is likely to be very different than the way that today. Identity is likely to be one of the big topics also, because identity is unlikely to continue to be the way it is done today with a CBDC. Of course, some of the risk, including the risk of cybersecurity, is very different. Financial reporting is one of the big topics also, because CBDCs, which is money in a digital form, can allow for much more efficient financial reporting, since you are able to track all the different flows of cash. And finally, of course, talents and skills, because it is a very different types of business, a different types of activity that we're taking. So that's the reason why at the beginning I was saying CBDC, one of the most fascinating but also impactful topic in financial services today. If we're saying we're moving into a different world, this is a different types of money, then in that case, it has very broad impacts everywhere. So let's have a look at case studies. So CBDC initiatives, a very good source, cbdctracker.org. You will see almost all the different CBDC initiatives being tracked. What you will see, more than 100 CBDC initiatives around the world by different countries, but also a lot of cross-border, cross-country collaborations. Some examples of initiatives in CBDCs, some examples, for example, Project SEDA or Project UBIN is around cross-border wholesale CBDCs. Project Mariana is also cross-border wholesale CBDCs. Project Mandala is different. It's about compliance in CBDCs and making sure that you can have compliance between jurisdictions for CBDCs. Project Orchid, purpose-bound money. I will tell you about this one. We're really proud to be a part of Project Orchid. I think CFT might be one of the only, or perhaps the only, education institution across the world to have been involved in a CBDC project. And Project Enbridge, which I will tell you about also, with the involvement of SAMA, the Saudi Central Bank. So a lot of initiatives in CBDCs, a lot of them, like those ones, which involve a lot of different central banks and cross-collaboration. So let's have a look first at two examples from Saudi. The first one, Project Enbridge. So Project Enbridge, really interesting CBDC, links to the topic that a lot of you mentioned, which is cross-border payments. As you know, cross-border payments, very complex, very expensive, very slow. So the objective of Project Enbridge is to have different central banks, in that case, 5 different ones. There is the People's Bank of China. So there's China, Thailand, UAE, Hong Kong, and Saudi with SAMA, that worked on the ability to send money cross-border, so between jurisdictions, and for wholesale. So wholesale meaning between banks or large organizations. It has reached quite an important milestone in June of this year, which is the milestone of MVP, minimum viable product, where the first experimentations went well enough. So now there's an additional stage of experimentations with more organizations which are being involved. So a really interesting project, and which is quite different of when you think of CBDC of just one country working one CBDC. Here is really across collaboration with the idea that if I create a CBDC, then in that case, there are some objectives like cross-border that should be also solved. The second project was Project ABER, one of the first projects in the world in 2019, and that was a collaboration between SAMA and CBUAE, the Central Bank of the UAE. And here the objective was also cross-border payments with the idea of creating a joint digital currency that would be linked to both the real and the dirham. That was one of the very, very early projects in CBDC, so 2019, with the objective of linking central banks, linking commercial banks also between the two different countries. So really interesting in terms of early experimentation for CBDCs. Project Orchid, one of the projects where we as CFT have been involved, which is totally different, which is around purpose-bound money. And the idea of purpose-bound money is, I'll give you an example. So I don't know if you have children, so you might have children, brothers and sisters, etc. So let's say you have children. The parents might say, I'd like to send money to my children, but I would like them to buy books and not sweets. Normally, you cannot do it. In the case of Project Orchid, you can do it. That's the objective of purpose-bound money, which is money which is used for a certain specific purpose. And so there have been a lot of different experimentations across a lot of different sectors. For example, with Grab, the equivalent of Uber, or in education with us, CFT, to see how we could use purpose-bound money, which is really pushing the boundaries of money, because at the moment, we've never done this. So that's another idea in terms of what we could call programmable money. And then this one is something which is, again, totally different. It's around bond tokenization. It's called Project Venus. What is bond tokenization? So you have bond or corporate bonds which are issued by corporate clients. And there was this project between EIB, the European Investment Bank, Societe Generale, Goldman Sachs, for example, to issue a bond on the distributed ledger. And in order to do that, you need a CBDC. So you need some version of money, and in that case, of euro on a blockchain. And this is what the Banque de France did with an experimental digital euro. So through those 4 examples, I have shown you totally different examples of CBDCs. One which is cross-border payments across 5 different jurisdictions. One which is here an idea of having a dual currency or jointly issued currency on CBDC. This one is about programmability of money, so trying to change the features of money. And this one is about helping the capital market. So for example, here for bond tokenization, and to help capital markets be more efficient. And so you see the impact of CBDC is likely to be very, very widespread because it is across the whole financial system. And so what is the future of CBDCs? So the future of CBDCs, I have highlighted 6 important trends. First one, what is really clear is that money in the digital world is not stopping anytime soon. We know that money in the digital world is a very long-lasting and very important trend. So you can definitely bet on it. The second one is that the concept of money in itself is being rethought at the moment. Remember Project Orchid, programmable money, doing things which are just really different, which we never thought of before, because before we only had cash. I think we are likely to see much more innovation in the concept of money, which could have very, very positive impact. For example, for financial inclusion or others, rethinking money could be really interesting. The third one is CBDC experiments, very, very numerous at the moment. We are likely to see much, much more CBDC experiments in the future, both at the national level and also at the global level. At the moment, most CBDC experiments do involve a lot of central banks, including SAMA, for example. I think that what we will see is much, much more involvement from the private sector. So, for example, banks or also asset managers or insurance companies in the future. International collaboration is definitely a very interesting trend that we see in CBDCs, which is likely to continue much, much, much more, because cross-border is usually one of the reasons why central banks and governments are thinking around money in the digital world. And finally, let's not forget that there are some other trends which are coming, like AI and quantum, which are coming very, very quickly. And at some point will intersect, because if we're talking about creating money for the next 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years, then technology will have a very important role in it. And as part of it, AI and quantum will have to be thought over. So let me go into the Q&A session, but first, let me summarize our discussion so that you have a good idea of what we talked about. So we went back to the foundations of what is money, which is fundamental to understand if we talk about CBDCs. We talk about what is the financial system today, which is a two-tiered system with the role of central bank and commercial bank. So as we rethink the world with CBDC, those two entities will have a very important role. What was at the beginning was really the white paper of 2008 and Libra in 2019. Today, there are two different ways of thinking of CBDCs, wholesale CBDCs and retail CBDCs. There are a lot of projects which are taking place all around the world today for CBDCs, including in the region, including in Saudi. And in terms of the trends, it is not stopping. It is accelerating very, very quickly. And finally, in terms of resources, if you'd like resources, and definitely I would encourage you to go deeper in this topic. It's a fascinating topic that has impacts on everyone. Fintech Saudi has a lot of resources and will be able to share resources on CBDCs. SAMA, of course, now as the central bank, would have a really important role in all the initiatives. At CFT ourselves, we have a lot of resources on CFT, including research, projects, etc. The BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, has a lot of information and is involved in a lot of projects. And finally, the CBDC tracker to give you an idea of all of those projects. And so on this, I see that Karim has come back.
Hugh, we've got so many questions coming in, but we've also got so many comments saying that this was a really great session. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to start with the easy questions. Are CBDCs going to replace fiat?
So are CBDCs going to replace fiat? Not really, because CBDCs are a version of fiat, actually. So if you think of fiat, fiat is money, which is issued by a central bank. And fiat today as cash, is physical. If you think of fiat in a digital format, then in that case, that would be CBDC. So it will not replace. It's likely to be complementary for a very long time, until the time where we have no more fiat as cash, but only fiat as digital, and that would be CBDCs.
And that sort of leads to the next question: is today in Saudi Arabia specifically, we see a lot of e-wallet or wallet solutions that are already allowing for quick transactions, easy transactions, transfers. How are CBDCs going to be different from that, and why are we even going there if the current technologies allow for something very similar? So digital money or digital wallets, right?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question, because e-money and what you'd have in your wallet is what I call the digitization of money, which is this is the current financial system, and we are using and we have put it on the internet with no e-wallet. What we talk about for CBDCs is quite different. We're really talking about the future of central bank money. So really, what is money for a central bank? And you need both. You need both. You're likely to have both that are being used, but at some point, as a central bank, there are activities which you need to do, which you cannot do, through e-money, which you can only do through a version of your own money, which is called central bank money. So for you as an end user, that's a really good question, because perhaps you won't see too much differences at some point. As an end user, it might be exactly the same. You could do the same, on your phone, and you can still transfer money, peer-to-peer, contactless, etc. Perhaps, what will be happening is a wholesale version of CBDC, and you will never touch it. The only organizations that will touch it will be the central bank and a bank. But at some point, we know that the equivalent of cash will move into a digital version. That could be called a CBDC or something else, but there will be a version of money in a digital world.
There's a small ad going around. I don't know if anyone saw it, of people at the grocery stores trying to pay with a crypto, and they tap their phone and they're like, "Oh, this is going to take 27 minutes to confirm, so please have a seat." So that's one aspect of crypto. I'm assuming this CBDC is not going to be the case, but one of a lot of the questions that we're getting is the impact on the retail, from the retail side. You talked about wholesale, you talked about retail, but we're also getting on the retail side specifically a lot of questions related to privacy. How is this going to impact my privacy today? If I'm using CBDC, and the tracking is going to be even more specific than if I'm using cash, or maybe my credit card already tracks fine, but versus cash. So the privacy aspect of things.
Yes, so that's a really good point, because that's the point that comes back really often, which is if I use cash, I have privacy and anonymity. So if I give Saga cash, then nobody would know, about this transaction. But if everything is on a ledger, on technology, then in that case, what happens? And it is actually, one of the usually, one of the main questions in all the CBDC projects, which is privacy and anonymity, because there's nothing that says that it has to be tracked. It's just a design feature of the CBDC. So there's a lot of projects which are thinking about what kind of privacy and anonymity should we have in CBDCs. And there's a lot of different answers which are likely to be different based on the country. So for example, you could have three different types of options. One, which is everything is tracked. So all single transaction, even 1 dirham, would be tracked. You could have something which is totally the opposite, which is no single transaction is ever tracked. Just like cash today, then nothing is tracked. Some of the thoughts at the moment are much more in the middle, which is saying some transactions, small transactions, no less than 100, 1,000 dirhams, for example, or reals, will not be tracked, but no bigger transactions, will be tracked. But those are design decisions. Those are not technological or others. With the technology, you can decide to do whatever you'd like. And what is interesting is that, and that's the reason why it is likely to take time to implement CBDCs, is that all of these discussions are discussions from a central bank standpoint, but there are discussions where people are also wondering how it should work.
Hugh, I'm getting so many questions. I'm trying to sort of get them here together. two questions that I think are important. One is the impact on commercial banks. How is that going to impact the way commercial banks currently operate? But the second one that I think is quite interesting today, CBDC, central banks control money supply. They print money, they remove money from the market, and the value of money goes up and down. What is the impact of the value of money when it's on CBDC? And because it's so much easier, I guess, to print or or to add supply or remove supply. So two questions on that.
So the impact on commercial banks could be humongous. I think can be really, really humongous. It can be really big. So when I was at Citi, one of my roles that I was working with the treasury of Citi. So basically, that manages the money of Citi. And you know how it works in large banks, the amount of money and the flows between retail clients and corporate clients and mortgages and etc. It's very, very finely tuned. So we spent the last 50 years for commercial banks to have this kind of system. So now if we're thinking about suddenly there's something which is a new currency or new digital currency, it could go to a commercial bank, or it could go directly to a retail bank, or etc. That totally transforms basically your activities, the way you think of what you should do, the business that you're in, how you make money, your business model. So it can be totally huge. On the other side, I also mentioned Project Venus, for example, which is when we talk about CBDC, CBDC is potentially one part of a broader trend, which is, for example, tokenization. Using having financial instruments like bonds or equities, on the distributed ledger, and all of that is linked. And that's the reason why I said I think there's going to be much more involvement of banks very, very quickly, because now we're starting to move to a closer level where central banks have increased a lot the knowledge of CBDCs. The expertise of CBDCs in central banks has gone up a huge amount. It's not the same at the level of commercial banks at the moment. So I think here, that's a case of commercial banks having to catch up a bit in terms of their expertise.
On this question, do you think the digital banks that are coming up have an advantage over traditional commercial banks when it comes to CBDCs?
Not necessarily. I don't think that the fact that they're digital, of course, helps for them to be more nimble in terms of their activities and to adapt if they want to. But I do not think that it is at that level. I think those that will adapt are those that can understand very quickly the direction of travel and how CBDCs is likely to impact their business, which at the same time really forces them also to think of what is the business of a bank in a digital world, which is again one of the big topic.
I want to take you back to supply of money and how it will impact how central banks will use CBDCs in that aspect.
So with CBDCs, central banks should be able to have a much better control of money. So, for example, during COVID, in the US, that the US basically sent checks to people for stimulus to make sure that the economy was going well. What happens to that money? Nobody knows actually. It took a long time. I think it took perhaps 4 to 6 months to have an idea of the money and actually to realize that the money wasn't used for spending, but mainly for saving. If you had CBDCs, then actually you could direct your efforts much faster in a much more efficient way by saying, let's send money only to people who need money for food, for example, and let's send money to SMEs that need money for their activities. So that you can do with CBDCs, which you can do with cash, or in the case of the US, that was with checks. So I think that CBDC as a monetary instrument is really interesting because it allows for features which we cannot have with the current financial system.
Today, it was a good question. I'm coming back to it in a second, but until I get back to that question, a lot of questions are coming in, and I have to ask this question. what's the difference between CBDCs and cryptos out there, right? And why is it that central banks take so long to issue CBDCs and are testing it while the private coins are coming up every day, you know?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So CBDCs are issued by central banks. Cryptos are issued by anyone. So for example, I could issue a crypto, this afternoon or tonight if I wanted to. So whenever I talk about crypto, I always have to start with the disclaimer. A lot of people have a lot of very different views on cryptos. Cryptos, for me, is a speculative asset. So it's a speculative asset. No, it can, I'm not saying that it will, no, it has to go down or up. No, it's a speculative asset. And so because of that, cryptos, not today, are much more an instrument which a lot of people would buy, for speculative, reasons. Now, I also know that, when you think of, crypto, you might think a lot of the features that we talk about for CBDCs, let's say, for example, cross-border and, financial inclusion, etc. All of these kind of things, could work, which is fine. That could be the case in terms of financial inclusion. If you do not have access to money, if you have a phone, perhaps you can access crypto. However, the fundamental difference between one and the other, and going back to the point of speed, is that I could issue my crypto tonight if I wanted to. What's the impact of this? Very, very little impact. I could take the money of people who love my crypto, and that's it. I have a crypto business. What is the impact of issuing a CBDC? It's humongous. It's humongous. You're really talking, we talked about the impact on commercial banks. Every small activity in a bank will have an impact. I don't know if you remember, for example, in the UK 2 years ago, and the disastrous budget that there was, where they just announced basically a very, very small thing. They just announced, we will change this in the budget. And suddenly almost all the pension funds in the UK almost went bankrupt, pretty much in just a few days. So finance, at that level is a very carefully balanced system. And so because of that, CBDCs, that's what I mentioned before, is likely to take a lot of time. And I would say as an ex-banker, it's better that it takes more time rather than doing something and having unforeseen consequences after.
Hugh, thank you so much. This was so insightful. Lots of comments about how great this session was and how you've been able to simplify the topic of CBDC and get it across. So thank you so much for your time. I want the attendees to stick around. I want to share my screen for 1 second. And we did announce, for those who were with us last week, we did announce 24 Fintech. We want to come back and just give you quickly a bit more insight. Allow me to share my screen here for a second. Let's just do this. And do let me know when you see my screen.
Yeah, I can see it.
Perfect. So if you haven't heard of it, it's happening. 24 Fintech is going to be held for the first time in Riyadh on the 3rd to the 5th of September. So make sure you book your calendars if you have not already done so. Just as a reminder, it will be hosted by the main regulators in Saudi Arabia and the kingdom. So the central bank, the monetary authority, the insurance authority, as well as the financial sector development program. Of course, it's co-organized by Fintech Saudi and Tahaluf. We're expecting to see more than 200 speakers, 200 investors, a lot of international speakers as well, and many, many hours of super interesting content on that topic. I would like to also say, with the permission of Hugh, that Hugh will be joining us during the conference, and there are some special programs that CFTE will be running. So keep your ears and eyes tuned for that. And looking definitely forward to having you and CFTE with us at 24 FinTech in September. We're making it easy for you, but we're also asking you to please choose one of those QR codes, whether you're a LinkedIn person, an X person, an Instagram person, or a Facebook person. Follow 24 FinTech, interact with the posts. Let's spread it, spread the news about 24 FinTech so that we have an amazing attendance from all over the world. Interact with the social media posts and make sure you also register and reserve your spot from now. So looking forward to having you all here with us in Riyadh on the 3rd to the 5th of September. With that, I'm going to stop my sharing. I don't know if okay, there it is. Okay, come back here. With that, I want to thank you once again for this amazing session. I want to remind you all to join us next week for another exciting session of the FinTech Summer Sessions. The topic next week is going to be about super apps. And again, a topic that is super hot, and we're going to learn a lot about it. If you haven't joined us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Twitter and LinkedIn, please do join FinTech Saudi. And if you haven't joined the Telegram group, we do post all the recordings of the sessions on the Telegram group, along with the links to the presentation. So if you want access to those, you need to join the Telegram group. And with that, again, thank you, and CFTE, thank you for that. Sagar, do you want to add anything? Did we miss anything here?
No, you're spot on. Thank you very much again to you and CFTE, and thank you all for joining. Looking forward to another exciting session next week, and we'll all be at 24 FinTech, so looking forward to meeting you all in September physically as well.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks a lot for the very kind invitation, FinTech Saudi. And I'm hugely looking forward, for 24 FinTech. The FinTech ecosystem is really booming in Saudi, and having this first conference, I think, will be huge. So hugely looking forward to being there and seeing a lot of you there.
Thank you so much, and have a great night.